Yeah. But all right, let's get into this fourth article here. All right. As India joins China in distancing from Russia, Putin warns of escalation. Underlining Russia's widening isolation on the world stage, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India told President Vladimir V. Putin on Friday that it is no time for war, even as the Russian president threatened to escalate the brutality of his campaign, in Ukraine. The televised critique by Mr. Modi at a regional summit in Uzbekistan came just a day after Mr. Putin acknowledged that Xi Jinping, China's leader, had questions and concerns about the war. So, I'm sure you guys already know, but Russia is getting fucking absolutely clobbered in Ukraine right now. Now, I'm not one of those people who like jump on that information and I'm like, oh, it's over. Ukraine, they got it. They're gonna fucking liberate themselves and it's all gonna be freaking fine and dandy. No, wars have ups and downs. Sides gain and lose, but they did lose a pretty significant amount, and I think that made China and India, who have been nominally not supporting the war, but still supporting Russia and not falling in line with NATO and the West in terms of sanctions and cutting off Russia from the global economy. I think they're starting to realize that the stability that this war is causing around the world in terms of supply chains and the economy globally is just might not be worth their support. So they're trying to, in their, political maneuvering ways, rein in Russia and be like, well, can we try to talk about this and see what's going on? Because this really isn't good for us. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but I do want to say as well, like, obviously, I support Ukraine being sovereign and having its own state without having the threat of fucking invasions and annexations around them. But they're not making it easier for Russia to stop this invasion. Like, they've ruled out talks that would, or like negotiations that would include them giving up the Donbass region of Ukraine, which in my view, it's like, I mean, I understand you want to maintain like the integrity of your state, but when there's thousands upon thousands of people dying and all this destruction, I think you do have to make compromises. Not saying those compromises are good or necessarily fair, but in my eyes, the less death and destruction, the better. Instead of beating your chest and being like, "Oh, yep, we're big and powerful, and you can't step on us." There has to be more nuance, in my opinion. Anyway, that's just that's an aside. All right. Taken together, the distancing from Mr. Putin by the heads of the world's two most populous countries, both of which have been pivotal to sustaining Russia's economy in the face of Western sanctions, punctured the Kremlin's message that Russia was far from a global pariah. I know that today's era is not of war, Mr. Modi told Mr. Putin at the beginning of their meeting, describing global challenges like the food and energy crises that were hitting developing countries especially hard. Today, we will get a chance to discuss how we can move forward on the path of peace. So again, kind of saying it without saying it, they're trying to gently persuade Putin to take a less aggressive approach on Ukraine, which, hey, that's good for Ukraine. I'm not complaining, but at the end of the day, it's just all power politics, man. It's what it always is. India is like a rising superpower, and they don't want to risk that rise going all in for a superpower that, or not really even a superpower anymore, but a former superpower trying to retain or regain superpower status. It's like, you guys are kind of like, damn. Like, Russia is kind of fading away from the global stage, and India wants to make sure that it's one of the countries that kind of takes the place in this kind of global maneuvering. You know what I mean? All right. So the implicit criticism of Mr. Putin underscored that he now faces perhaps his most challenging moment of recent months, suffering not just these diplomatic setbacks, but also retreats on the battlefield and intensifying questions back home. And you know what? I think I actually looked at this article and it shows. Yeah. So it shows the area that Ukraine has taken back. So and this is just in 1 week, as opposed to what Russia had captured in 5 months. So obviously, I mean, Russia's fucking hurting. You can say whatever about, their size and their equipment, but they're getting fucked up pretty hard right now. And again, not to say that they're going to lose because they have more people. I mean, in my eyes, that's one of the biggest things, man. They can just keep on throwing soldiers there to try and brute force the problem. And a big reason why Ukraine is also doing so well is because the U.S. and NATO is just fucking pouring in weapons and aid, man, which I also kind of disagree with. Like, I'm all for, like, humanitarian aid, obviously, like, sending, like, Doctors Without Borders and food aid and infrastructure aid, rebuilding infrastructure of civilian areas. But, I mean, they're sending in fucking bombs by the ton, you know what I mean? And they're also providing, like, intelligence to them. Like, I'm surprised that Russia hasn't already declared war on NATO and the U.S. I mean, obviously that wouldn't be great for them, but I mean, like, we are, make no mistake, at war with Russia, doing everything but having boots on the ground there. It's a dangerous fucking situation that could escalate quickly. So yeah, just wanted to show you guys that there real quick. The implicit criticism of Mr. Putin underscored that he now faces perhaps his most challenging moment of recent months, suffering not just these diplomatic setbacks, but also retreats on the battlefield and intensifying questions back home over how he has conducted the war. That's something I also wanted to bring up too. Like, because of our interconnected internet age that we live in now, propaganda does not work like it used to. And the people who make the propaganda know this. So there's only so much lying and bullshitting they can do before they have to admit some things aren't okay. And you can see that in Russia right now on their, like, state news programs. They're starting to have a broader, more nuanced debate about the war, as opposed to before when they first went in. They shut all the opposition down and was like, no, Russia's the best. This is about, you're reunifying the post-Soviet lands and denazifying the Ukraine, which admittedly Ukraine does have a Nazi problem, but so does Russia and pretty much every other fucking majority white nation on earth. Yeah. So, but Mr. Putin's own next step remain a mystery, and Western officials believe that he could still drastically escalate the intensity of Russia's assault if he is confronted with further defeats. In a news conference Friday after the summit of Asian leaders, Mr. Putin described a recent Russian cruise missile attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure as warning strikes that could portend, I don't fucking know, that could cause an even more vicious campaign. At the same time, apparently mindful of the unease among key partners like China and India, Mr. Putin insisted that he was ready for talks without naming any preconditions, and that his war aims did not necessarily extend to all of Ukraine. He made no mention on Friday of the border goals of demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine that he announced when he started the war in February, terms that were widely seen as Mr. Putin declaring his intention to achieve political control over the country. And that's definitely what it was. Like, in the beginning, I think Putin had kind of like an inflated overconfidence of the military might of Russia and just kind of jumped the gun. I mean, in my opinion, like this whole action by him and the government and the military of Russia was just stupid, man. Like, it's like they made themselves a pariah state to all of the West, while you have these other superpowers who are struggling to become these superpowers and have this dominance, who don't want to rock the boat too much and risk that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that they're seeing right now. So they're between a rock and a hard place. I really don't understand the mindset, other than just a old egotistical sociopath wanting to play emperor, bro. Play that freaking imperialist game. Shit, only he knows, I guess, man. It's freaking crazy. All of this just strongman bullshit that has led to countless lives lost and ruined, man. It's truly fucking sad. Very, very freaking harrowing, man. At the same time, apparently mindful of the unease among partners like China and India, Mr. Putin... okay, yeah, I already read that. He said that the main goal of his invasion was limited to capturing the Donbass, the eastern Ukrainian region where Russia has recognized as independent two Kremlin-backed statelets, but where Ukraine still controls several key cities and towns. And like I said, Ukraine is not willing to give up those cities. I say cut your freaking losses, get the people who aren't in those regions back to living a normal life as soon as possible, and work something out, man. This is not about appearing big and bad and powerful. This is about limiting human destruction and loss of life. But most of our leaders don't give a shit about that. It's all a political game. Zelensky is honestly particularly just disgusting to me. The way that he goes about this, like fucking, he'll go to meetings with other world leaders and he'll be wearing like the freaking like the undergarment of like, you know, military gear, just trying to look badass, I guess. I think it's sickening and just stupid. He is an actor, so I guess he can't help himself, but that's beside the point, man. Just all our leaders suck. Mr. Putin has repeatedly warned that Russia's assault could still intensify, a threat now weighing on American officials, who believe Mr. Putin could increase the size of Russia's forces deployed to Ukraine, or could mount attacks against the NATO countries, providing Ukraine with arms. The officials also say Russia could mount a new push in Ukraine's east or south, or step up a campaign to target the Ukrainian leadership. Oh, excuse me. Again, that's something that I've been personally worried about, is like NATO and the US are going really hard with the aid, really hard with the support for Ukraine. And you never know when Russia is going to say that enough is enough and declare war on maybe one of the smaller NATO countries. And I don't think that the bigger NATO countries in America would necessarily step in militarily, because it's too big of a risk. I mean, like, it could spell fucking nuclear devastation for everyone on Earth. So even what we're doing right now could do that. So it's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game that they're playing. Expanding his capacity to fight the war, however, would require Mr. Putin to build up his military. So far, Mr. Putin has been unwilling to announce a widespread full military mobilization, and many American officials believe that is off the table because of the political repercussions domestically. 100%. I don't think drafts really work anymore, especially in more developed nations. Like, nobody wants to fight and go die over some pointless bullshit. Like, there would be mass protests. I would assume that the polls are fudged that show the support being like super, like showing the Russians being super supportive of the war. It's probably bullshit. If I had to guess, it's probably like 50-50 over there. Again, that's just a guess, but they would not go for a draft. I don't think any developed nation would. But former American officials said Mr. Putin could take a smaller, less politically destabilizing step, calling up more reservists and returning military veterans to service. We are not fighting with our full army, Mr. Putin said on Friday, while asserting that his military plans for the invasion need no adjustment. That is just such... that's just so childish to me, man. He's like, you haven't even seen my full power, but we're still doing good, and don't correct me. I'm doing good. Like, come on, man. Such an insecure fucking weirdo, bro. That's who power attracts, man. Just people who have the need to dominate others, or are just so insecure they want to dominate others to feel like they have that control, man. The main goal is the liberation of the entire territory of Donbass, Mr. Putin said. This work continues despite these counteroffensive attempts by the Ukrainian army. The general staff considers some things important, some things secondary, but the main task remains unchanged, and it is being implemented. But when he sat down with Mr. Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Putin was markedly more demure. Along with China, India has emerged as a pivotal financier for Moscow during the war, including by purchasing Russian energy at a discount. Both countries have also provided Mr. Putin relief at the United Nations, abstaining from votes critical of Russia's aggression. So again, India is kind of in a similar position to China, where they're not necessarily aligned with the global order of NATO in the United States and those Western European countries. And they're trying to play all angles to get as much as they can economically and political out of Russia. So again, they'll buy the gas from Russia because it's cheaper, but they aren't going to go full in and support this war because, like I said, it hurts the global supply chain, which hurts India. Raises prices, makes food harder to buy, all that good stuff. India's steady relationship with Moscow long predates its recent expansion of ties with the United States. Russia has remained the main source of cheaper arms for India's military. So again, you can see just trying to play all sides to get that leg up. So when Mr. Modi told Mr. Putin on camera on Friday that today's era is not of war, it was a signal that a country that the Kremlin has billed as friendly was now trying to distance itself. Mr. Putin claimed to the Indian leader that it was Ukraine's fault that the war continued because Kiev was not suing for peace, but he acknowledged Mr. Modi's displeasure. I mean, it's your fault because you started the fucking war. But again, I begrudgingly kind of have to agree with him, man. I mean, the powers that be in Ukraine are going for this full-on death or like victory or glory and death type of attitude, where it's like, we will not, capitulate to the Russian aggressors and blah 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 blah. But it's like, again, do you care more about some lines on a map or do you care about human lives? It's obviously they care more about the lines on the map. At least that's my opinion. I know your position on the conflict in Ukraine, your concerns that you constantly express. We will do our best to stop this as soon as possible, Mr. Putin said. Only unfortunately, the opposing side, the leadership of Ukraine, announced its abandonment of the negotiation process, which they did, again. And not to keep on shitting on Ukraine, so let me reiterate, Russia is the aggressive. They're the bad guys, as much as nations can be good guys and bad guys, Just putting that out there. In his news conference, Mr. Putin offered another oblique acknowledgement that China's government, too, is unhappy over the war in Ukraine. In part, analysts say, because the resulting turmoil in global food and energy markets has threatened China's economic growth. It's all about the money, baby. They're hurting from exports being more expensive and them not being able to get the vital resources that they need to keep industry moving and shaking. So they're like, come on, man, what the fuck are you doing over there? There were also issues related to crises, Mr. Putin told reporters, describing his meeting with Mr. Xi the previous day. These issues were also discussed in a well-meaning but principled manner. Yeah, I mean, so overall, you see these countries not really happy with the progress Russia is doing. I guarantee you that if Russia had been more successful, they would have kind of placed their bets more on Russia's side. But they see that Russia's kind of struggling, not necessarily going to be defeated again. I've seen a lot of articles being like, oh, this is the end for Russia. It is most definitely not, And on top of that, Putin seems like he has a very big ego, and he doesn't want his ego bruised by retreating from this war, So we'll have to see what happens. It's interesting to see these players kind of put their chess pieces into position and maneuver and all of this bullshit, man,